whispering community. This is Fantasy Roleplay Whispers, coming to you with a ramble video about Dungeons and Dragons, specifically the rules and precepts that I operate under when I run a D&D campaign. Though this also applies when I write about fantasy. I will try to be more laid back in this video. I will pick up the tone of, the pace of my speech a bit, and I shall, though I will still attempt to speak softly to relax you. So please feel free to comment with any suggestions or how you believe this affects the ASMR performance of this video. Let me know if you wish me to speak faster or slower. Alright, now on to the ramble. You do not have to understand Dungeons and Dragons or have any knowledge of its rules or anything like that to enjoy this video. I hope that it will be sufficiently relaxing for you, whether you enjoy Dungeons and Dragons or not. So, first, we're going to talk about magic, specifically the role of magic in fantasy settings and Dungeons and Dragons campaigns. It has been, in my experience, that I believe magic should be an awesome event. It should be a factor of great mysticism and intrigue and mystery in a D&D campaign and in fantasy in general. The Harry Potter series, as great as they are an example of the idea of commonplace magic that I do not particularly enjoy. The idea is, as you can see in Harry Potter, magic is just a commonplace scientific fact. There is no mystery surrounding it. It lacks that mystical appeal that the very idea of magic should. When you attach that idea of power and mystery to the idea of magic, it enhances its use in the campaign and in fantasy much more. Examples of mysterious and powerful magic can be found in the Conan the Barbarian movies, not the remake, but the originals with Arnold Schwarzenegger. In those movies, if you are not familiar, magic is not to be used by the common man on the street. It is an aura of great power that requires many magicians to organize their efforts to utilize it, and it is incredibly powerful. Few know anything about it, and those few are incredibly powerful. Another good example this kind of magic is the Lord of the Rings series. In it, you have but a few wizards who control magic. They are considered legendary in their world. The common man on the street has little knowledge of, and certainly no ability to use magic. When running a D&D campaign, I find that it brings that element of mystery adds a huge degree to the campaign. So, how can a DM achieve this idea of magic? The first way, and easiest way, is to roleplay its significance in your game. Whenever people mention magic, or the idea of magic comes up, show or have villagers and whoever the players are interacting with make sure that magic has an aura of fear and significance in their conversations. If one of the players is a mage, then, and if villagers or whoever the players are interacting with learn that he is a mage, then have them react with great fear or wariness to his presence, or at least a great acknowledgement that he is a mage, a wielder of magic. Another way to emphasize the significance is to alter the strategies and the game mechanics of how magic is used. A way that I do this is I heavily edited the D&D 4.0 wizards and magic classes so that they do an insane amount of damage, but they are very weak individually. So they are or can be incredibly powerful, but only if they work strategically within a group. This enhances the need for strategy among the players and makes the one or two mages among the players feel that much more important. It gives them a role to fulfill, and it separates them from the others. So next, we're going to talk about the ideas of damage and healing in a campaign. It is important that damage is considered serious. It is unfortunate that in all too many, or in most D&D or Dungeons and Dragons campaigns, and even on other fantasy media, such as World of Warcraft, or many other fantasy games, such as the Elder Scrolls series, damage or taking damage and healing from that damage is a non-event. There is practically no consequences. There are practically no consequences for taking a giant spear thrust to the chest, for example. This blands or deadens the campaign, and to open up a whole nother area, a whole nother facet of strategy, it is important to emphasize the significance of damage and to show consequences for when players become injured. Ways that a dungeon master can do this are to, well, for one, to make damage actually matter by removing all magical band-aids. literally punishes the players immediately for nonchalantly taking a lot of damage. Other ways that you can emphasize this facet of strategy is to increase the dangers of when someone takes damage, adding realistic side effects and consequences, such as becoming, or the possibility of infection, and the necessity of treating wounds. This opens up a huge part of a campaign that is largely abandoned in most fantasy media. I find that when you restrict the players to realistic roles, the players react to it jubilantly. They become far more cautious because they must. They're careful about taking damage. They are more conservative in their planning and battlefield strategies. And they have to roleplay. They are forced to roleplay to a degree by whenever they set out on a venture, they are certain, if they're smart, to pack certain sutures and antiseptics and anesthetics and a host, and to make sure they have their healer equipped to deal with injuries. And when you make them have to care for their infections, then they're much more careful about that. A popular scenario in most fantasy media, such as the Elder Scrolls series or World of Warcraft and D&D, is the sewer scenario, which is basically any event which makes the players have to explore the sewers and inevitably fight in the sewers. When you include the importance and consequences of taking damage and injuries, then this becomes far more dangerous, as it should. As you can imagine, the sewers, let alone medieval sewers or fantasy sewers, would be very infectious places. Yet this idea and this danger is ignored in most fantasy and many Dungeons and Dragons campaigns. Yet when you make the players have to take this into consideration, then this makes them even more careful, just as one would in real life. This opens up, again, I repeat this, but it is worth repeating, for it is the purpose of this video. It brings in facets of strategy to the campaign, and it forces the players to become more strategic, to strategically respond to real-world restrictions. Alright, so next, let's talk about languages, the role of languages in fantasy and Dungeons and Dragons campaigns. This is a massive plot device, or this can be a massive plot device if used correctly. In any global or science fiction-ish universe, such as Star Wars or Star Trek or any of the others that I've mentioned previously, the plot point of language is almost always brushed over as a non-point. Yet this is another point of strategy that can open up a whole nother part to a campaign. In most Dungeons and Dragons campaigns, there are racial languages, but many Dungeons Masters unfortunately brush this idea aside by simply brushing this over by saying that everyone the players will come across speaks the common language. In Star Wars, it's brushed over that everyone just speaks the common, galactic common, or basic, I believe it's called in Star Wars. In Star Trek and other sci-fi universes, the plot point of languages is brushed over with the idea of universal translators, which are installed in everyone's heads. And I can understand that sometimes these are plot points that just need to be brushed over and to match the style of the show. But if, when running a game or a campaign, you take this plot point into consideration, then this forces the players to have to become even more strategic. This brings in the need for the players to actually have to pay attention to what languages they're learning, or what languages that each of the people that each of them know. They may require translators if they're traveling in a very foreign part of the universe. And this opens up a whole nother area of it adds much more uncertainty to the campaign. When they come across a random traveler, they might have to try 2 or 3 different languages before they can find one he understands. In the current campaign that I am running, the language barrier was a huge thing to the players. The party that I was running through in this campaign spoke 3 languages: Common, Goliath, and Elvish. And they came across many restrictions when they encountered kobolds who spoke Draconic, and goblins who spoke Goblin, and other humans which spoke a different language, and they just could not communicate at different times. And they themselves told me down the line that they told me far into the campaign that they finally decided to just start teaching each other the languages that they knew. The giant that one of the players who spoke Goliath said he would start teaching the rest of the party Goliath. Two of the players who spoke Elvish would start teaching everyone else Elvish. One of the players who spoke Draconic and Goblin was what started teaching everyone else those languages. And I was thrilled by this because for 2 reasons. One, as I said before, it opens up a huge part of the campaign. It opens up a huge area of strategy that the players have to adapt to, and more often than not they do so brilliantly, trying to figure out ways to obtain translators into ulterior means of communication. And but also, as the dungeon master, you can use the language barrier to steer the players in one direction or another. So next, let's quickly talk about dragons and the role of dragons in your campaign, or in any fantasy setting. I've noticed this especially in World of Warcraft, but dragons are more often than not kind of gleamed over as they are kind of like the idea of magic. dragons, they're commonized, they are made a mediocre animal or event, when this simply should not be the case. Dragons should not be the players should not groan at the sight of another dragon, another cheap dragon that they have to kill. Dragons should be significant, magnificent, mysterious, mystic, mythic creatures. They should be like magic, something that is a significant event in the campaign, or in any fantasy setting. Dragons should be they should have a mystical and mysterious aura around them that the players can admire, just, and as I keep repeating this, just as with magic. When you attach the idea of mystery and significance to both dragons and magic in a campaign, and when you bring that in for the players to face, then that makes the campaign as a whole, or the fantasy setting as a whole, that much more mysterious and uncertain and fascinating for the players or the reader to enter into. So finally, that's about it actually. Yeah, I went a little, I took up a little more time than I was intending to, but this was my first Ramble video, just talking about some of the basic precepts that I like to keep in mind when running Dungeons and Dragons campaigns, or when I write about fantasy, or just looking at any fantasy setting or idea. So again, please feel free to comment or with any suggestions that you have about how to induce ASMR more effectively, or if you would like to discuss any of the topics that I brought up in this ramble, then feel free to do so. I look forward to any suggestions or ideas that